Welcome back to the channel. Tonight we are going to be discussing the Haunting of Hill House. But before we get started, I would like to mention that this story is not fiction. The author of the novel upon which this series is based was inspired by true events. So with that being said, let's get into it. Shirley Jackson wrote The Haunting of Hill House in 1959. She said that she was inspired by a house in New Hampshire called the E, and another home in Vermont called the. When researching these homes, I could not find much information about them, but I did come across a few interesting articles that may or may not be related. There is an article from the Bennington Banner titled Ghostly Happenings at Old Bennington House, and another article I found was titled Specters Haunt Local Residents. These articles share similar details to those of the novel and were published around the same time, so I do think they are relevant. Shirley Jackson had 4 children and lived in a home in North Bennington, Vermont. This was during the 1950s when paranormal investigators were not taken seriously, so she used her own experiences with her home and the local area to write the novel. While living in Vermont, Shirley Jackson experienced strange things that happened in her home, and she also explored allegedly haunted places. This novel was written while she and her family were living in a farmhouse in North Bennington. This particular farm was originally built in 1784, so needless to say, it had quite a history. The house had been occupied by 9 different families since its construction, including the Jacksons. In the book, the main character is named Eleanor, who is referred to as Nell by her friends. Nell grew up in a home with her sister and brother-in-law. Her sister was named Theodora, Theo for short. In real life, Shirley Jackson's name was spelled Theodora. Shirley's daughter, Joanne, was also alive at the time the novel was written, and her name was spelled Theodora, too. It's pretty obvious that Shirley used her daughter as inspiration for the character of Theo. In the novel, their mother passed away and their father married one of his co-workers, which left the sisters without any family. So the two decided to move to Hill House. In the book, Hill House is located in New England, but in real life, Shirley Jackson's home was in Vermont. Shirley also had a summer home on Grove Place in Bennington, which is just down the road from where she lived with her family. And the home she rented for her summer home was originally built in 1784, just like her farmhouse. Now, this may not seem important, but what I'm about to tell you will make sense once I show you the layout of the house. The home on Grove Place that Shirley Jackson rented was exactly the same layout as Hill House. It has 4 bedrooms, a bathroom, a parlor, dining room, kitchen, and basement. Just like Hill House, there are long hallways that connect all of the rooms. In the basement, there is also a stone root cellar that can be accessed from inside the house or from outside using a door that is set into the hill. This part is also exactly the same in both houses. Now that we've covered the similarities between the home that Shirley Jackson lived in and Hill House, I'd like to tell you about some of the hauntings that occurred in her home. The first incident happened in the basement. It was the 1950s, and Shirley Jackson was using her basement just like anyone else. She kept food down there, stored tools and other items. She told her husband that she wasn't comfortable having all of the food down there because she felt that someone was trying to communicate with her through the activities that took place. She described her basement as dark and dank. At one point, Shirley and her husband came downstairs and found that the lids to all of their canned goods had been removed. They also found traces of teeth marks on the lids, and the food was untouched. Other times they would find food on the floor, and the cupboards would be wide open. At one point, she opened the cupboard herself and saw that all of the lids were facing forward and the food was facing backward. Then, sometimes the cupboards would be completely bare. Another thing that happened was that pans would go missing. She would look everywhere for them, but never found them. Then they would just randomly appear, like when she went out to hang laundry and found them in the clothesline. She would put the food back and seal the containers tightly, but every time she turned her back, the lids were back on the floor again. She and her husband came to the conclusion that a small animal must be getting into the basement, but after setting traps, they caught nothing. So whatever it was invisible. One night they heard scratching coming from the basement, and when they went to investigate, they found that a loose floorboard was vibrating. When Shirley stepped on the floorboard, it stopped making noise. The next day, her husband fixed the step, and the noise was never heard again. It was then that they decided to move all of their food upstairs. After that, nothing else ever happened in the basement. But there were still other things happening in the house. During the daytime, they would often hear footsteps in the hallways and doors would slam shut. Sometimes they would hear disembodied voices. And the final straw was when Shirley was sitting in a chair and it suddenly tipped over backwards. This is when they decided to rent a summer home and move all of their belongings there. And now, I'd like to share with you some of the local hauntings that Shirley Jackson researched while living in Vermont. In 1954, the Bennington Banner published an article titled, "Specters Haunt Local Residents." In the article, it states that many residents have experienced strange happenings in old houses and buildings in southern Vermont. The article goes on to state that ghosts are plentiful in the region and haunt even some of the newer buildings. It gives examples of people seeing apparitions, hearing chains dragging metal bed frames moving on their own, clocks ringing and doors opening and closing on their own. These sightings have happened in several well-known buildings in the area, including the Old Tavern in Bennington, the Old Jail in Manchester, and the historic Eagle Hotel. Not only are the residents of the area experiencing paranormal activity, but so are visitors to the area. In 1956, the Bennington Banner published an article titled, "Ghostly Happenings at Old Bennington House." The author of the article stayed overnight in the home and experienced strange things for themselves. This house is located at 36 Main Street in Bennington, Vermont. It was originally built in 1792 and is currently operating as a bed and breakfast. Here is what the author had to say about their experience. "I saw a little girl standing at the foot of the bed looking at me. Then she turned and walked toward the window. I sat up in bed and watched her walk across the room and then she disappeared." They also witnessed other strange things while staying at the home, such as furniture moving on its own and footsteps in the middle of the night. The author goes on to say, "About 3 o'clock in the morning, I was awakened by the distinct sound of footsteps on the stairs. My companion slept soundly, but I lay there listening. Footsteps came slowly up the stairs, stopped at the door of our room, and then went down the stairs again." The author concludes their story by saying, "Whether the house is really haunted or not, there are undoubtedly odd spots in the building and strange sounds which cannot always be explained." This house that the author stayed in was apparently also used as an emergency hospital during the War of 1812. A patient died in one of the rooms, and it's believed that this may be why the ghost of a little girl roams the halls at night. Another location mentioned in this article is the Old Jail in Manchester. This is a common story. The caretaker was working alone and suddenly heard shackles dragging metal moans. The sound appeared to be coming from the cells in the basement. Then he heard the sound of a woman crying. He investigated and found the cell door slightly ajar. When he opened it, the crying stopped. All right, folks, that's all I have for tonight's video. I hope that you enjoyed learning about the true story behind the haunting of Hill House. If you did, please show your support. I would really appreciate it. Thanks again for watching. Have a great night and stay safe.